In a small, quiet house in Pahrump, Nevada, a man lives a life of calculated modesty. He collects stamps and rare coins, enjoys the dry desert air, and lives on his social security check. There are no super yachts in his driveway, no sprawling estates bearing his name. There is only the quiet, unremarkable rhythm of a retirement earned through a lifetime of conventional work, a world away from the glass and steel headquarters of the company he helped create. His name is Ronald Wayne, and he is often called the unluckiest man in tech history. His home, worth perhaps $150,000, is a monument to a single decision made decades ago. Every object within it, every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, exists in the shadow of a fortune so vast it's difficult to comprehend. A ghost of wealth that could have been valued in the hundreds of billions of dollars. To understand why, you have to understand the man's core operating system. Wayne was governed by a profound and deeply ingrained aversion to risk. This wasn't a casual preference. It was a philosophy forged in the fire of failure. Years earlier, he had started his own company, building and selling slot machines, a venture that ended in a painful bankruptcy, costing him around $20,000 of his own money and leaving scars that never truly healed. His system was simple: never again allow a business venture to threaten his personal financial security. Capital preservation wasn't just a strategy, it was survival. This cautious, methodical man was working as a chief draftsman at Atari in 1976 when he found himself in the orbit of two brilliant, chaotic young men, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. They were a whirlwind of ambition and technical genius, but they needed a steady hand, an adult in the room to mediate their frequent disagreements and provide structure. Wayne, older and more experienced, became that figure. He was the one who drafted the original three-way partnership agreement, carefully outlining the responsibilities of each founder. For his role as the tie-breaking vote and senior advisor, he was granted a 10% stake in the new enterprise they called Apple Computer. He even drew the company's first logo, a complex pen and ink drawing of Isaac Newton sitting under an apple tree. But this partnership agreement contained a feature that would prove terrifying to Wayne's risk-averse mind. Under the laws of a general partnership, all partners are personally and fully liable for any debts the company incurs. The corporate veil that protects modern shareholders didn't exist. Suddenly, Wayne's role shifted from a detached, wise mentor to a man whose personal assets were legally bound to the whims of two young men with no money to their names. Jobs had his VW van, Wozniak had his calculators. Wayne, on the other hand, had a house and a modest life savings, all of which were now on the line. The moment of triumph quickly became a trigger for his deepest fears. The new company landed its first major order: 50 fully assembled Apple I computers for the Byte Shop, a local retailer. The total value of the sale was a staggering $25,000. It was the validation they had been dreaming of, the first real sign that their garage-based operation could become a legitimate business. For Wayne, however, that $25,000 order was not a signal of future success, but a harbinger of potential ruin. The abstract danger he'd been contemplating became a concrete, immediate threat. To fulfill the order, they needed to purchase about $15,000 worth of components. This was money Apple simply did not have. If they took out a loan to buy the parts, and the Byte Shop failed to pay, a common occurrence in the electronics business, the creditors would not sue the penniless company. They would sue the partners. The procedural mechanics of the deal were a nightmare for a man like Wayne. They would have to secure a loan for the $15,000, personally guaranteeing it. The Byte Shop, while a significant customer, had a reputation for being slow with payments. This wasn't a gamble on a future technology. It was a present-day credit risk, and the collateral was everything Wayne owned. The entire structure of the deal played directly into the failure scenario he had spent years trying to avoid. The weight of that potential $15,000 debt became an obsession. It was a sum nearly equal to his entire life savings. The risk aversion system that had protected him for years was now flashing red, blaring alarms in his mind. Faced with the choice between a 10% chance at an unknown fortune and a very real possibility of personal bankruptcy, his internal calculus provided only one possible answer: get out, and get out now. On April 12, 1976, just 11 days after signing the partnership agreement, Ronald Wayne returned to the county registrar's office. He filed a statement of withdrawal, a legal document that formally renounced his role and his 10% stake in the Apple Computer Company. In exchange for his signature, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak handed him a check for $800. The entire process was procedural, quiet, and devoid of the drama that would later define the company. For Wayne, the primary emotion wasn't doubt or regret. It was profound relief. It felt like stepping away from the edge of a cliff. The crushing weight of potential personal bankruptcy, the sleepless nights spent worrying about creditors seizing his home and his assets, simply vanished. That $800 wasn't the price of a future fortune. It was the price of a peaceful night's sleep. He believed he had made not just a rational choice, but the only sane one available to a man in his position. The immediate consequence of his withdrawal was minor. He had his $800, and Apple had its remaining two founders. The company, now a duo, pushed forward with the Byte Shop order, eventually securing the necessary credit and delivering the 50 computers. Wayne went back to his life, his job at Atari, and his personal projects, believing he had successfully navigated a brief but dangerous business entanglement with two young, brilliant, but financially reckless visionaries. But a subtle yet profound shift had occurred. He was no longer the adult supervision in the room. He was an outsider. The phone calls from Jobs stopped. The late-night strategy sessions in the garage happened without him. A few months later, the company incorporated, and Wayne was paid an additional $1,500 to forfeit any and all future claims against the new corporation, a final procedural severing. He was now just another spectator, watching from a distance as the small venture he helped birth began to take its first steps. The financial system Wayne opted out of was not one of simple addition, but of exponential multiplication. A 10% stake in a startup isn't a static asset worth a fixed dollar amount. It's a claim on a fraction of all future growth. That initial $800 represented 10% of a company with virtually no assets. But as Apple's value grew from thousands to millions, then from millions to billions, the value of that 10% stake would have compounded at a rate almost impossible to comprehend. The ultimate consequence of that $800 decision is a number so large it becomes abstract. Had Wayne retained his 10% stake, its value today would be roughly $300 billion. It is arguably the most expensive financial decision in human history, a single signature that separated a man from a fortune larger than the gross domestic product of most countries. That $800 check bought him peace of mind, but it cost him a dynasty. Living with that knowledge creates a unique psychological burden. It's not the sharp sting of a bad stock trade, it's the lifelong shadow of a parallel existence. Every Apple product launch, every news report on its record-breaking earnings, every mention of its trillion-dollar valuation is a quiet reminder. It's the knowledge that a different choice would have meant a fundamentally different reality, not just for him, but for generations of his family. Yet, over the decades, the story transitions from one of unimaginable loss to one of philosophical reflection. Wayne himself has been remarkably consistent in his telling of the events. He doesn't frame it as a mistake. He doesn't lament the lost billions or curse his own caution. Instead, he presents it as a decision that, while financially catastrophic, was personally necessary. Today, Ronald Wayne lives a modest life in a small town in Nevada. He deals in rare stamps and coins, a passion that provides a small income. He lives in a comfortable but simple home, worlds away from the sprawling Silicon Valley estates owned by other early tech pioneers. His environment is not one of failure, but of quiet, deliberate separation from the world of high-stakes capitalism he once briefly inhabited. The prevailing emotion he projects is not regret, but a calm, resolute acceptance. He has often stated that, had he stayed with Apple, the stress and the whirlwind pace set by Jobs would have led him to an early grave. He believes he would have become the richest man in the cemetery. It is a powerful, self-preserving narrative that transforms a multi-billion-dollar miscalculation into a choice for life itself.